The biting winter wind whistled through the cracks of their makeshift shelter, but Lucas barely noticed it anymore. His attention was focused entirely on his little sister Sarah, who lay shivering beneath a pile of salvaged blankets. At just 10 years old, he had mastered the art of scavenging through the endless mountains of discarded treasures that surrounded their home in the landfill, always searching for anything that could make their lives a little more bearable. "Here, Sarah," he whispered, wringing out a damp cloth he'd soaked in rainwater collected from their improvised drainage system. This should help with the fever. He placed the cool cloth on her forehead, his heart aching as she whimpered in her fitful sleep. The shelter they called home was a testament to Lucas's resourcefulness. Built from discarded wooden pallets, corrugated metal sheets, and whatever materials he could find, it kept out most of the rain and wind. Inside, he'd created a cozy nest of sorts, with foam padding salvaged from old furniture serving as their bed, and carefully cleaned plastic containers storing their precious drinking water. Sarah's condition had been deteriorating for days. The herbal teas Lucas prepared from plants growing around the landfill's edges weren't helping anymore. He touched her forehead again, feeling the heat radiating from her skin, and his worry deepened. At 8 years old, Sarah was all he had, left in the world, and he'd promised himself he would never let anything happen to her. Their daily routine of collecting recyclables to sell had come to a halt with Sarah's illness. Lucas glanced at their dwindling food supplies. A few cans of beans and some slightly stale bread he'd managed to get from a sympathetic bakery worker. He needed to go out to find more, but he couldn't leave Sarah alone in this condition. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the gaps in their shelter's walls. Lucas had learned to tell time by these shadows, knowing exactly when the recycling trucks would arrive with new treasures, and when the guard shifts would change at the landfill's entrance. This knowledge had helped them survive for the past 2 years, ever since they'd found themselves alone in the world. Sarah began to cough violently, her small body convulsing with each spasm. Lucas quickly lifted her head, supporting her, until the coughing subsided. When it finally did, her breathing was shallow and rapid. Something was very wrong. Lucas, she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so cold." He wrapped another blanket around her, but she continued to shiver. The fever was getting worse, and for the first time since they'd started living. In the landfill, Lucas felt truly helpless. He knew the basic survival skills they needed, how to find food, how to stay warm, how to avoid trouble, but this was different. This was something he couldn't fix with his usual resourcefulness. As night fell, Sarah's condition worsened. Her breathing became more labored, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Lucas stayed awake, watching over her, using the last of their clean water to keep the cloth on her forehead cool. He tried to remember everything he knew about treating fevers, but nothing seemed to help. Through the long hours of the night, Lucas held his sister's hand, telling her stories about the adventures they would have when she got better. He spoke of the beautiful things they sometimes found in the landfill, old books with colorful pictures, broken toys he could fix, and the occasional piece of jewelry that sparkled even covered in dirt. But Sarah didn't respond to his stories like she usually did. She just lay there, burning with fever, her breathing growing more irregular by the hour. As dawn approached, Lucas made a decision that would change their lives forever. He couldn't wait any longer, hoping Sarah would get better on her own. They had always avoided going into the city, knowing how people looked at landfill children, but now he had no choice. His sister needed real medical help, and he would have to find a way to get it. "Hold on, Sarah," he whispered, gathering what few clean clothes they had. "I promise I'll find a way to make you better. Just hold on a little longer." The morning sun had barely risen when Lucas began his preparations. He dressed Sarah in their cleanest clothes and wrapped her in their warmest blanket. She was lighter than ever as he lifted her in his arms, her body burning with fever against his chest. The city's hospital was several miles away, but Lucas had memorized the route during his recycling runs. "We're going to get you help," he whispered, carefully navigating through the maze of trash heaps. Sarah didn't respond, her head lolling against his shoulder. Her silence scared him more than any of her previous symptoms. The journey into the city was like entering another world. The pristine streets and towering buildings were a stark contrast to their life in the landfill. People hurried past, some averting their eyes, others staring openly at the dirty boy carrying a small bundle. Lucas ignored them all, focused solely. On reaching the hospital, he could see looming in the distance. As they approached the hospital's emergency entrance, Lucas's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. The automatic doors slid open, releasing a blast of cool air that made Sarah shiver in his arms. The bright fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell were overwhelming after the familiar odors of the landfill. "Please," Lucas called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "My sister needs help." But the busy hospital staff rushed past, seemingly deaf to his pleas. A security guard approached, his face stern and unwelcoming. "You can't be in here without a parent or guardian," the guard said, reaching for Lucas's shoulder. "Where are your parents?" Lucas stepped back, clutching Sarah tighter. "She's very sick. She needs medicine, please." His voice trailed off as he saw the guard's expression harden. "This isn't a place for street children. There are proper channels. For people in your situation, you'll need to leave." The guard's words hit Lucas like physical blows, but he refused to give up. He tried approaching the reception desk, but the clerk barely glanced at him before returning to her computer screen. The message was clear. They weren't welcome here. As he stood in the busy hospital lobby, Sarah's breathing grew more labored. Lucas felt tears of frustration burning in his eyes, but refused to let them fall. He'd promised to protect his sister, and he wouldn't fail her now. Looking around the hospital, he began to notice things. The way the staff moved, the locations of the security cameras, the service corridors branching off from the main hallways. A plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, possibly dangerous, but Sarah's life was worth any risk. He retreated to a quiet corner of the lobby, pretending to leave while actually studying the hospital's routines. He watched as nurses pushed carts filled with medical supplies, noting which corridors they used and how they accessed different areas. When a group of visitors entered through the main doors, Lucas used their presence as cover to slip deeper into the hospital. He kept to the edges of hallways, making himself as invisible as he'd learned to be in the landfill. Sarah remained quiet in his arms, her fever now so high that her skin felt like it was on fire. The medicine carts were his target. He'd seen nurses taking supplies from them, and they had to contain something that could help Sarah. As he moved through the hospital corridors, he remembered all the times they'd had to evade security at the landfill. This was no different, he told himself. Just another survival challenge. A service elevator opened, and Lucas quickly pressed himself against the wall, becoming as still as a statue. Two nurses walked past, discussing patient rounds, completely unaware of his presence. Years of living in the landfill had taught him how to become invisible when necessary, and now those skills were serving a new purpose. Finally, he spotted what he was looking for, a medication cart temporarily left unattended, while a nurse spoke to a doctor at a nearby station. Lucas's heart raced as he realized this might be his only chance. Sarah's weight in his arms reminded him of what was at stake. Time seemed to slow down as Lucas watched the medication cart. The nurse was still engaged in conversation with the doctor, their voices a distant murmur in the busy hospital corridor. With his heart thundering in his chest, Lucas inched closer, trying to keep his movements as natural as possible while carrying Sarah. The cart was organized with military precision, neat rows of bottles, packages, and supplies. Lucas had taught himself to read by studying discarded newspapers and magazines in the landfill, and now those skills proved invaluable as his eyes quickly scanned the labels. He recognized words like fever and infection from warning labels on bottles they'd found. Sarah stirred weakly in his arms, her skin still burning against his. The sound of her labored breathing strengthened his resolve. With practiced smoothness, he reached out and grabbed several items that matched the words he'd been searching for: antibiotics, fever reducers, and some sealed syringes. He tucked them into the pockets of his oversized jacket, trying to make his movements appear natural. Just as he was about to step away, Sarah began coughing violently. The noise drew immediate attention. The nurse broke off her conversation, turning toward the sound. Lucas froze for a split second, then his survival instincts kicked in. He darted away from the cart, holding Sarah close as he hurried down the corridor. "Hey, stop right there!" The nurse's voice echoed behind him, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Lucas didn't look back. He'd learned long ago that hesitation meant capture, whether from landfill security guards or street gang members. The hospital's corridors became a maze as Lucas ran, his mind working furiously to remember the path back to the entrance. Left turn, right turn, past the elevator banks. He could hear more voices joining the pursuit now. Sarah's weight slowed him down, but he refused to give up. A security guard appeared at the end of the corridor, alerted by the commotion. Lucas spun around, spotting a service door marked "Staff Only." Without hesitation, he pushed through it, finding himself in a narrow maintenance hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as he ran, casting strange shadows on the institutional green walls. The pursuit was getting closer. Lucas could hear walkie-talkies crackling with descriptions of a boy carrying a small child and possible theft of medical supplies. He knew they would be watching the main exits now. His mind raced, remembering how he'd observed the hospital's layout earlier. A sign pointing to loading dock caught his attention. Where there were delivery areas, there were usually multiple exits. Lucas followed the signs, his arms aching from carrying Sarah, but his determination unwavering. The loading dock was deserted at this hour, with only a few empty trucks parked at the bays. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor behind him. Lucas spotted a partially open emergency exit door and made his decision. He pushed through it, triggering an alarm that blared through the building. The morning sun momentarily blinded him as he emerged into an employee parking lot. Without slowing down, Lucas weaved between parked cars, using them as cover. He could hear shouts and running footsteps spreading out behind him, but he had one advantage: years of experience in evading pursuit. He'd learned every trick for disappearing quickly, for becoming invisible in plain sight. Sarah whimpered softly, bringing Lucas's focus back to what really mattered. The stolen medicines felt heavy in his pockets, each step making them bump against his legs. But they represented hope. Hope that he could save his sister, hope that she would recover from this fever that threatened to take her away from him. As he reached the edge of the parking lot, Lucas spotted a delivery van pulling out. With perfect timing born from countless similar situations in the landfill, he used the van as cover, staying in its blind spot as it drove past the security checkpoint. Once past the hospital grounds, he quickly ducked into a narrow alley between two buildings. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as Lucas navigated the back streets he knew so well. These weren't the clean, well-maintained streets of the main city thoroughfares. These were the forgotten spaces, the shortcuts and hideaways that children like him used to survive. Here, he was in his element. Finally, when he was certain no one was following, Lucas paused to check on Sarah. Her breathing was still shallow, but she seemed a little more alert. "We're going home," he whispered to her, adjusting his grip to make her more comfortable. "I got what you need. You're going to get better now." The journey back to the landfill seemed longer than ever, each step weighted with the precious cargo of both his sister and the stolen medicines. Lucas's mind was already racing ahead, trying to remember everything he'd learned about caring for sick people from the discarded medical books he'd found. He would need clean water and a way to measure doses correctly. The familiar sight of the landfill's towering trash heaps brought both relief and anxiety to Lucas. The morning sun cast long shadows across the endless piles of discarded items, creating a landscape that most would find desolate, but that he had learned to call home. As he approached their usual entry point, something unusual caught his eye. A sleek black luxury car parked near the entrance, its polished surface completely out of place among the surrounding debris. Lucas instinctively slowed his pace, years of survival instincts kicking in. No one who owned a car like that had any business at the landfill, especially not at this hour. He carefully moved behind a large pile of discarded furniture, making sure to keep Sarah protected as he observed the scene before him. A man in an expensive suit emerged from the car, his movements hurried and nervous. He kept looking over his shoulder as he opened the trunk, removing a large black garbage bag. Lucas noticed how carefully the man handled the bag, as if its contents were fragile. The man's expensive shoes sank slightly into the soft ground as he made his way into the landfill. Something about the situation felt wrong. Lucas had seen people dump things in the landfill countless times, but never someone dressed like this, never someone so obviously out of place. He watched as the man quickly made his way to a relatively isolated area, depositing the bag between two large piles of industrial waste. The man's departure was even more hurried than his arrival. He practically ran back to his car, his polished shoes now covered in mud and debris. The engine roared to life and the car sped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the mysterious black bag. Lucas waited several minutes, ensuring the man wouldn't return, before carefully making his way toward the spot where the bag had been left. Sarah stirred in his arms, reminding him of the urgent need to get her back to their shelter and administer the stolen medicine. But something about that bag tugged at his curiosity, the way the man had handled it, the secrecy of his actions. When he reached the bag, Lucas noticed something that made his blood run cold. The bag was moving. Ever so slightly, but definitely moving. Setting Sarah down gently on a relatively clean piece of cardboard, he approached the bag with caution. Years of living in the landfill had taught him to be wary of unexpected movements. Usually they meant rats or other animals. But this was different. As he carefully opened the bag, a sound emerged that he hadn't heard in years, the cry of a newborn baby. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be expensive hospital blankets, was a tiny infant, its skin still showing traces of birth and its umbilical cord hastily cut. Lucas stared in shock at the baby, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The infant's cries grew stronger, echoing across the landfill. Without hesitation, Lucas gently lifted the baby from the bag, checking for any injuries. The child was cold, but appeared otherwise unharmed. Now he had three urgent problems: his sister's illness, the stolen medicine in his pockets, and a newborn baby abandoned in the landfill. Lucas's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do. He couldn't leave the baby here, but Sarah needed immediate attention. With careful movements, Lucas managed to create a sling from his jacket, securing the baby against his chest. He then picked up Sarah again, her fever still burning through her clothes. The weight of both children made his arms ache, but he forced himself to keep moving toward their shelter. Their home had never seemed so far away. Each step was a challenge, as Lucas balanced the needs of both children. The baby had quieted somewhat, apparently soothed by the warmth of his body and the gentle motion of walking. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing still worryingly shallow. Finally reaching their shelter, Lucas quickly set about creating a safe space for both children. He laid Sarah on their bed of salvaged foam, then created a makeshift cradle for the baby, using a sturdy cardboard box lined with their cleanest blankets. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the stolen medicine, reading the labels carefully in the dim light filtering through the shelter's walls. As he prepared to give Sarah her first dose of medicine, Lucas heard something that made his heart skip a beat, sirens in the distance growing closer. Through the gaps in their shelter, he could see flashing lights approaching the landfill. His mind flashed back to the luxury car, the man in the expensive suit, the abandoned baby. Somehow he knew these events were connected. The approaching sirens sent waves of panic through Lucas's body, but he forced himself to remain calm. His first priority was getting medicine into Sarah's system. With trembling hands, he carefully measured out the dosage of antibiotics and fever reducers, following the instructions on the labels with painstaking attention to detail. "Here, Sarah," he whispered, supporting her head as he helped her swallow the medicine. "This will make you feel better." The baby in the makeshift cradle began to stir, making soft whimpering sounds that threatened to become full-blown cries. The flashing lights were getting closer now, their blue and red glare penetrating the cracks in the shelter's walls. Lucas could hear car doors slamming and voices shouting instructions. They weren't the usual landfill security, these were police officers, and they were conducting a systematic search. "We have reports of stolen hospital supplies and a missing infant," a loud voice announced through a megaphone. "We are authorized to search the entire premises." Lucas's mind raced. They were looking for him, not just because of the stolen medicine, but because of the baby too. They must have connected the hospital incident with the missing infant, but they didn't know the whole story. They couldn't know about the man in the expensive suit. Sarah's breathing had already begun to ease slightly, the medicine starting to take effect. The baby, however, was becoming more restless, its whimpers growing louder. Lucas knew he had to make a decision quickly. They couldn't stay here. Their shelter was too exposed, too obvious to searching eyes. With swift, practiced movements, Lucas gathered their most essential supplies into a small backpack. He had prepared for situations like this, always keeping their most valuable possessions ready to move at a moment's notice. The medicine went into the pack, along with their small supply of clean water and food. "Hold on, Sarah," he whispered, wrapping her in their warmest blanket. "We need to move." He secured the baby back in the makeshift sling, praying it would remain quiet. Years of navigating the landfill had taught him every hidden path, every concealed space where they could take refuge. Just as they slipped out of the shelter, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness nearby. Lucas froze, holding his breath. The beam swept past their location, illuminating the mountains of trash around them. He could hear footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris growing closer. Lucas began to move silently through the shadows, carrying Sarah while keeping the baby close to his chest. He knew the landfill better than anyone, its hidden passages, its secret spaces. There was an old shipping container buried partially under years of accumulated trash that they had discovered months ago. It had become their emergency hideout, stocked with some basic supplies. The search was intensifying. More flashlight beams crisscrossed the darkness, and Lucas could hear police radios crackling with updates. They had found their shelter. He could hear exclamations of discovery and calls for forensics teams. But Lucas and his precious cargo were already far from there, moving deeper into the maze-like patterns of the landfill. Sarah stirred in his arms, her fever still high but her breathing steadier. The baby remained miraculously quiet, perhaps sensing the need for silence. Lucas navigated carefully through the darkness, avoiding the unstable piles of trash that could shift and create noise. As they approached the hidden container, a new sound caught Lucas's attention: helicopter rotors. A powerful searchlight swept across the landfill from above, turning night into day wherever it touched. Lucas pressed himself against a mountain of crushed cars, using the shadows for cover. The container was just ahead, its presence barely noticeable among the surrounding debris. Lucas had carefully concealed its entrance months ago, creating a small tunnel through the trash that only someone of his size could navigate. It was their last resort, their final safe haven. With extreme care, Lucas maneuvered through the narrow passage, protecting both Sarah and the baby from the rough edges of twisted metal and broken plastic. Inside the container, darkness was absolute, but Lucas knew every inch of the space by heart. He laid Sarah down on the emergency bedding they'd stored there, then created a soft nest for the baby using spare blankets. The sounds of the search continued outside, but they were muffled now by layers of trash and metal. In the darkness of the container, Lucas could finally take a moment to think. He checked Sarah's temperature. It seemed slightly lower, the medicine beginning to work its magic. The baby had fallen asleep, its tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Lucas knew they couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, they would need more medicine, food, and clean water. But for now, they were safe. He sat in the darkness, listening to the breathing of the two young lives in his care, while above them, the search continued in vain. The hours in the shipping container felt like days. Lucas maintained his vigil, periodically checking Sarah's temperature and ensuring the baby remained comfortable. The search continued above them, but the sounds grew more distant as the night wore on. By dawn, only occasional footsteps and voices could be heard. Sarah's condition had improved significantly. Her fever had dropped, and her breathing was almost normal. She opened her eyes, looking around the familiar emergency shelter with confusion. "Lucas, why are we here?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. Before he could answer, the baby began to stir, its soft cries echoing in the metal container. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Where did the baby come from?" Lucas was about to explain when a new sound caught his attention, voices directly above their hideout, but these weren't police officers. Through the thin gaps in the container's roof, fragments of conversation drifted down. "She's going public." "With it," a man's voice said, tense with anxiety. "Victoria's holding a press conference this afternoon about the baby's disappearance." "Are you insane?" another voice responded. "You said you'd handle this quietly. Now the whole city's looking for that kid." Lucas held his breath, recognizing the second voice. It belonged to the man in the expensive suit, the one who had abandoned the baby. He gestured for Sarah to remain quiet as they listened. "I had no choice," the first voice continued. "She was going to keep it, destroy everything we'd built. The company merger, the contracts, all of it would have fallen apart. I couldn't let that happen." "So you stole your own child from the hospital and dumped it here?" The second voice was incredulous. "And now there's security footage of me disposing of the evidence. Do you realize what this means?" Lucas's mind was racing. Victoria. The name was familiar. He'd seen it on business news headlines in discarded newspapers. Victoria Chen, the prominent businesswoman who had revolutionized the city's tech industry. The pieces were starting to fit together. The conversation above continued, becoming more heated. "The police are focusing on some kid who stole medicine from the hospital," the first voice said. "They think he took the baby too. It's the perfect cover." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. They were talking about him, using his desperate attempt to save his sister as a way to hide their own crimes. The baby stirred again and he gently rocked it, praying it would remain quiet. Sarah had been listening intently, her face showing understanding beyond her years. "We have to help the baby," she whispered. "We have to tell someone the truth." Lucas nodded, but he knew it wouldn't be simple. Who would believe two children from the landfill over wealthy, powerful men? The medicine he'd stolen complicated matters further. They'd assume he was lying to save himself. The voices above moved away, their conversation fading into the distance. Lucas checked his watch, a treasured find from the landfill that he'd carefully repaired. The press conference they'd mentioned would be happening soon. It was their chance to reveal the truth, but it would mean leaving their safe haven and facing the authorities. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "We can't hide forever," she said, sitting up slowly. Her strength was returning, the medicine doing its work. "That baby has a mother who's looking for it. Remember how it felt when we lost our parents. We can't let another family be broken." Her words struck deep in Lucas's heart. They had survived on their own for so long, trusting no one but each other. But now they had a chance to do something right, something important. The baby in his arms represented more than just another life to protect. It was an opportunity to break free from the shadows they'd been living in. "Okay," he said finally, reaching a decision. "But we have to be smart about this. We can't just walk into a police station. We need to get to that press conference, find Victoria Chen directly. She's the only one who might listen." Sarah smiled, her first real smile in days. "I'm feeling much better now," she assured him. "I can walk on my own." Lucas began gathering their supplies, including the remaining medicine and the baby's hospital blanket, evidence of its true origins. He knew the risk they were taking, but Sarah was right. They couldn't hide in the darkness forever, especially not with an innocent life at stake. The journey out of the landfill felt different this time. With Sarah walking beside him and the baby secured in the makeshift sling, Lucas moved with newfound purpose. The morning sun had burned away the previous night's fog, revealing a city that seemed both familiar and strangely new. "The press conference will be at the Chen Technologies building," Lucas explained, remembering the location from newspaper. "Photographs. It's in the business district about 2 miles from here." Sarah nodded, keeping pace despite her recent illness. The medicine had worked wonders, though Lucas made sure to carry their remaining supplies in case she needed another. Dosse. The baby had fallen into a peaceful sleep, seemingly content against Lucas's chest. As they walked through the city streets, Lucas noticed how people's reactions to them had changed. Yesterday they had been invisible, just two more street children to ignore. But now with the baby they drew curious and concerned glances. A few people even stopped to stare, probably connecting them to the news reports about the missing infant. "We need to be careful," Lucas whispered to Sarah. "The police are probably watching all the main streets." He led them through back alleys and service corridors, using the urban landscape as cover, just as they had used the mountains of trash in the landfill. They paused in a small park to rest, hiding behind some bushes while Sarah caught her breath. Lucas took the opportunity to check the baby, ensuring it was comfortable and warm. As he adjusted the blanket, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a tiny monogram in the corner. CCH. "Look," he showed Sarah the initialism. "This must be the baby's initials." The discovery made their mission feel even more real. This wasn't just any baby. This was someone's child, deliberately taken away from its mother. A police car cruised past the park, its occupants scanning the area. Lucas and Sarah remained perfectly still until it passed. They had learned long ago how to become invisible when necessary, and now those skills were more important than ever. As they neared the business district, the buildings grew taller and more imposing. The Chen Technologies building stood out among them, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. News vans were parked outside, and a crowd had already begun to gather. "There's so many people," Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with anxiety. Lucas squeezed her hand reassuringly. They found a position behind the crowd where they could observe without being noticed, using a newspaper stand as cover. Security guards were stationed at the building's entrance, checking credentials and managing the growing crowd of reporters. Lucas studied their movements, looking for patterns and weaknesses just as he did with the landfill security guards. "The press conference is in 15 minutes, they heard someone say. "Victoria Chen herself is going to speak about her missing baby." The baby stirred in its sling, making small sounds that thankfully were lost in the general noise of the crowd. Lucas adjusted his position to better shield the infant from view. They needed to find a way inside, but the main entrance was clearly not an option. Sarah tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a service entrance around the corner of the building. Delivery trucks were coming and going, creating regular gaps in the security coverage. It was their best chance, perhaps their only chance, to get inside. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" Lucas asked Sarah, concerned about her recent illness. She gave him a determined nod, her eyes showing the same resilience that had kept them alive all these years. They waited for the right moment, timing their movement with the arrival of a large catering truck. As the security guard stepped forward to check the driver's credentials, Lucas and Sarah slipped around the corner. The service entrance was propped open as staff carried in trays of food for the press conference. Using skills honed by years of survival, they merged with the flow of activity, becoming just two more shadows in the busy corridor. The baby remained miraculously quiet, as if understanding the need for stealth. Inside the building, the stark contrast between their world and this one became even more apparent. The floors were polished marble, the walls adorned with expensive artwork. Yet Lucas noticed something familiar in the rushed expressions of the staff. The same desperate energy he'd seen in people searching the landfill for valuable scraps. They followed the catering staff up a service elevator, emerging onto a floor buzzing with activity. Through glass walls they could see a large conference room being prepared. Camera crews were setting up their equipment, and important-looking people in suits were huddled in intense discussions. And then they saw her, Victoria Chen, standing, alone in a corner, reading from a piece of paper with tears in her eyes. Even from a distance, her pain was visible, raw and real. Lucas felt the baby stir, as if sensing its mother's presence. "That's her," Sarah whispered unnecessarily. "That's the baby's real mother." Lucas nodded, his heart pounding. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still to come. How could they approach her? How could they make her believe their story? The answer came in the form of a small sound. The baby, awakening from its nap, began to make the distinctive cooing sounds that only a mother would recognize. Victoria. Jen's head snapped up at the sound, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made Lucas's heart skip a beat. The baby cooed again, louder this time, and Victoria took a step forward, her hands trembling as she clutched the paper she'd been reading. "That sound," she whispered, loud enough for Lucas and Sarah to hear through the glass. "I know that sound." Before Lucas could decide what to do, Sarah took the initiative. She stepped out from behind their cover, pulling Lucas with her. "Please," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her recent illness. "We need to talk to you. It's important." Security guards immediately moved toward them, but Victoria held up her hand, stopping them in their tracks. She was staring at the bundle in Lucas's arms, her eyes wide, with recognition and hope. "Wait," she commanded, as one guard reached for his radio. "Let them come closer." Lucas approached slowly, carefully adjusting the sling so Victoria could see the baby's face. The infant's eyes were open now, looking up at the woman who had carried it for 9 months. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Charles," she whispered, reaching out tentatively. "My baby boy." The commotion had drawn attention. Reporters were turning their cameras toward the scene, and Lucas could hear excited whispers spreading through the crowd. A tall man in an expensive suit pushed through the gathering people, his face contorted with barely controlled panic. "Victoria, the press conference is about to begin. We should—" The man stopped short when he saw the baby, and Lucas recognized his voice immediately. It was one of the men from the landfill, the one who had been arguing with the man in the expensive suit. "Robert," Victoria said, her voice taking on a steel edge, "would you like to explain why my son is being carried by these children instead of being safely in his hospital crib?" The man, Robert, took a step backward, his face draining of color. I don't understand." "The police said a boy had stolen." "We didn't steal him," Sarah interrupted, her voice unwavering. "We found him in the landfill where we live. A man in an expensive suit left him there in a black garbage bag." Victoria's expression hardened as she turned to Robert. "A man in an expensive suit, like the one your brother James wears? James, the one I saw him wearing at the hospital yesterday?" The room had gone completely silent. Every camera was focused on the unfolding scene, every reporter frantically taking notes. Robert's eyes darted toward the exits, but security guards had already moved to block them. "You don't understand," Robert said, his composure cracking. "The merger. Everything we'd worked for and a baby would have ruined everything. James was just trying to protect our interests." "By stealing my son?" Victoria's voice was like ice. "By abandoning an innocent baby in a landfill?" Lucas stepped forward, still cradling the baby. "We have proof," he said, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out the hospital blanket with the monogram. CCH, Charles Chen Harrison. "And we heard them talking in the landfill this morning, planning to blame me for the theft because I had taken medicine from the hospital." Victoria turned to her security chief. "Call the police, now." Her attention returned to Lucas and Sarah, her expression softening. "The medicine, why did you take it?" Sarah spoke up. "I was very sick. Lucas took it to save me. He's been taking care of me ever since our parents." Her voice trailed off, but Victoria seemed to understand. "You saved my son," she said softly, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "Both of you. You protected him when his own family betrayed him." She looked at Lucas, really seeing him for the first time. "And you did it while caring for your sick sister, even though it meant risking everything." The elevator doors opened, and police officers poured onto the floor. Robert was quickly taken into custody, his protests falling on deaf ears. Victoria reached for her son, and Lucas carefully transferred the baby into her arms. "Charles is safe now," she said, tears of joy running down her face. "Because of you. But I need to know—" She paused, looking at the 2 children who had risked everything to save her son. Where will you go now?" Lucas and Sarah exchanged glances. They had been so focused on returning the baby, on revealing the truth, that they hadn't thought about what would happen afterward. The medicine would run out eventually, and their shelter had been discovered by the police. Victoria seemed to read their uncertainty. Still holding Charles close, she reached out and took Sarah's hand. "I think," she said softly, "that we have a lot to talk about." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The press conference had transformed into something entirely different from what was planned. Instead of a plea for help finding a missing baby, it became the story of two brave children who had saved him. Victoria Chen handled everything with remarkable composure, shielding Lucas and Sarah from the overwhelming attention of the media while ensuring their story was heard. The police interview room was nothing like Lucas had imagined. Instead of the harsh interrogation he'd feared, they were treated with genuine care. Victoria had insisted on being present, and her lawyer made sure their rights were protected. They told their story about Sarah's illness, the desperate search for medicine, and finding baby Charles in the landfill. "You understand. We'll need to verify everything," the detective said gently, looking at the hospital surveillance footage on her tablet. "But your story matches what we're seeing here. The timeline of when you took the medicine lines up perfectly with when Mr. Harrison was seen entering the maternity ward." Sarah sat close to Lucas, still tired but alert. The hospital had provided her with a proper examination, confirming that the medicine Lucas had given her was exactly what she needed. The doctor had been impressed by his careful attention to dosage and timing. The security footage from the parking lot shows James Harrison carrying something to his car at exactly 3:47 a.m., another officer reported, and traffic cameras tracked his vehicle to the landfill. Victoria, who had been listening while holding Charles, spoke up. "I want to drop all charges regarding the medicine. These children were in an impossible situation, and they still chose to do the right thing by saving my son." The detective nodded, making notes in her file. "Given the circumstances, and considering their ages and situation, we're inclined to agree. Our main focus is on James and Robert Harrison's actions." Lucas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, but a new anxiety was taking its place. What would happen to them now? The police had found their shelter in the landfill. They couldn't go back there. As if reading his thoughts, Victoria turned to them. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "One that I've been thinking about since we met. But first, I'd like you to come see something." After finishing with the police, Victoria's driver took them through the city in her private car. Sarah pressed her face against the window, amazed by how different the streets looked from inside such a luxurious vehicle. Lucas noticed they were heading to one of the city's most prestigious residential areas. The car turned into a tree-lined driveway, approaching a large house that managed to look both imposing and welcoming. Gardens surrounded the property, and Lucas could see a playground structure in the backyard. "This is my home," Victoria said as they got out of the car. "And I'm hoping it could be yours too." Lucas and Sarah froze, trying to process her words. Victoria continued, still holding Charles close. "What you did, saving Charles, protecting him, bringing him back to me, it shows something extraordinary about both of you. You've been surviving on your own for so long, taking care of each other, but you shouldn't have to do that anymore." She led them inside through a bright foyer into a warm, sunlit living room. "I have more space than I need, more resources than I could ever use, but most importantly, I have room in my heart. Charles will need siblings who are as brave and caring as you both are." Sarah's eyes were wide as she looked around the room. "You want to adopt us?" Victoria nodded, her eyes glistening. "If you'll let me. I know it's a big decision, and I know you'll need time to think about it, but you would have everything you need here. A safe home, good education, proper medical care, and most importantly, you'd have a family." Lucas felt overwhelmed. After years of taking care of Sarah, of making every decision based on pure survival, the idea of letting someone else share that responsibility was both terrifying and tempting. He looked at his sister, seeing the hope in her eyes. "What about Charles?" he asked, watching the baby sleep peacefully in Victoria's arms. "Won't people think it's strange adopting the children who found your stolen baby?" Victoria smiled. "People can think what they want. I believe it was fate that brought Charles to you, that your goodness and bravery led you to save him. You're already connected to him, to us. This would just make it official." She showed them around the house, pointing out the rooms that could be theirs. Each was larger than their entire shelter in the landfill, with real beds and windows that let in natural light. There was a library filled with books, a kitchen always stocked with food, and bathrooms with hot running water. As they completed the tour, Victoria led them back to the living room. "I want you to understand something," she said seriously. "This isn't charity or a reward. I genuinely want to be your mother, to give you the home and family you deserve. But it has to be your choice." Lucas sat on the plush sofa, his mind racing with possibilities. Sarah had fallen asleep beside him, exhausted from the day's events, but with a peaceful expression he hadn't seen in years. Victoria had given them space to think, taking Charles upstairs for his feeding while her housekeeper prepared dinner. The house felt surreal after so many years in the landfill. The soft carpet under his feet, the gentle hum of air conditioning, the faint scent of flowers from the garden. It was like stepping into another world. Yet somehow, it didn't feel as alien as he would have expected. Through the large windows, Lucas could see the sun setting over the city. From this height, he could even make out the distant outline of the landfill where they had lived for so long. It looked smaller from here, less threatening, like a chapter of their lives that was ready to be closed. Sarah stirred beside him, opening her eyes. "Lucas," she asked softly, "is this real? Can we really stay here?" Before he could answer, Victoria returned with Charles in her arms. She sat down across from them, her expression open and patient. "I know this is a huge change to consider," she said, "and I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll make sure you're taken care of. We can look into other options if you're not comfortable with adoption." Lucas looked at his sister, seeing the hope and longing in her eyes. For years he had tried to give her everything she needed, but there was so much that had been beyond his reach. Proper medical care, education, the simple security of knowing where their next meal would come from. "How would it work?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The adoption?" Victoria leaned forward slightly. "My lawyers are already preparing the paperwork. Given the circumstances and my resources, they believe we can expedite the process. You would legally become my children, with all the rights and protections that come with that." "Would we have to change our names?" Sarah asked, sitting up straighter. "Only if you want to," Victoria assured her. "You can keep your names exactly as they are, or you can add Chen to them. It would be entirely your choice." Lucas thought about all the times he had protected Sarah, all the decisions he had made for her survival. But this decision felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about giving her a chance at the life she deserved. "What about school?" he asked. "We haven't been able to go regularly." Victoria nodded, understanding. "We'll arrange for tutors to help you catch up at your own pace. You're both clearly intelligent and resourceful. With the right support, I have no doubt you'll thrive." Charles made a small sound, and Victoria adjusted him in her arms. The baby reached out, grabbing Lucas's finger with surprising strength. Sarah giggled at the sight, moving closer to make funny faces at her potential new brother. "We could be a real family," Sarah said softly, looking up at Lucas with pleading eyes. Lucas felt something shift inside him, a wall he had built, around his heart starting to crumble. For so long he had believed that he and Sarah could only rely on each other, that trusting anyone else was too dangerous. But watching Victoria with Charles, seeing the genuine love and care in her eyes, he began to imagine a different future. "When our parents," he started, then paused, gathering his thoughts. "We thought we'd never have a real home again. I've tried my best to take care of Sarah, but..." "You've done an amazing job," Victoria interrupted gently. "Most adults couldn't have managed what you've done, but you don't have to carry that burden alone anymore. Let me help. Let me be a mother to both of you." Sarah slipped her hand into Lucas's, squeezing it gently. He looked at her, seeing not just his little sister who needed protection, but a girl who deserved the chance to just be a child again. Then he looked at Victoria, who had shown them more kindness and understanding in one day than they had experienced in years. The sun had almost set now, casting long shadows across the room. In the gathering dusk, their reflections in the window seemed to merge. Victoria with Charles, Lucas and Sarah beside them, already looking like a family. The weight of the decision pressed on Lucas, but for the first time, it felt like a weight he didn't have to carry alone. The first week in Victoria's home felt like living in a dream. Lucas would wake up each morning in his new room, the soft dawn light filtering through real curtains, and spend several moments just trying to convince himself it was all real. The bed was so comfortable, it had actually taken him a few nights to get used to it. After years of sleeping on salvaged foam, the plush mattress felt almost too soft. Sarah had adapted more quickly, embracing their new life with the resilience of youth. She spent hours in the library, running her fingers over the spines of books she was determined to read once their tutoring began. Victoria had arranged for a comprehensive educational assessment, and both children had shown remarkable potential, despite their lack of formal schooling. "Look at this, Lucas," Sarah called out one morning, showing him a science book she'd found. "It explains all about medicine and how it works. Now I understand why those antibiotics you gave me helped so much." Lucas smiled, watching his sister's excitement. She was already looking healthier. Regular meals and proper medical care had brought color to her cheeks and energy to her movements. The doctor Victoria had arranged for them was amazed at how well Sarah had recovered, crediting Lucas's careful administration of the medicine. Victoria proved to be different from any adult they had known. She didn't just provide for them. She involved them in decisions, asked their opinions, and showed genuine interest in their thoughts and feelings. She had even asked them to help design their rooms, wanting the spaces to truly feel like their own. "What color would you like for your walls?" she had asked, spreading out paint samples. "And we should look at furniture catalogs together. These rooms should reflect who you are." The legal process of adoption moved forward, expedited by Victoria's resources and the unique circumstances of their case. The media had tried to follow the story, but Victoria's legal team had managed to keep the children's privacy protected. She was determined to give them time to adjust without the pressure of public attention. Charles became a bridge between their old life and new one. Lucas and Sarah had already formed a bond with him during their time in the landfill, and that connection only grew stronger. They would help Victoria with his care, and the baby seemed to recognize them, lighting up with smiles whenever they entered the room. "You're so good with him," Victoria commented one afternoon, watching Lucas gently rock Charles to sleep. "He truly loves you both." But adjustment wasn't always easy. Lucas still found himself hoarding food in his room, a habit born from years of uncertainty about their next meal. He would wake up at night, panicked about Sarah, only to remember she was safe in her own room down the hall. The ingrained instincts of survival were hard to break. Victoria noticed these struggles but never criticized. Instead, she found ways to help them feel more secure. She showed Lucas the well-stocked pantry, giving him his own key and explaining that he could access it whenever he needed. She installed a subtle nightlight system that let him check on Sarah without leaving his bed. "Healing takes time," she said gently one evening, after finding Lucas organizing his emergency supplies, old habits that were hard to break. "You've been so strong for so long. It's okay to gradually let go of these precautions as you feel ready." The household staff had been carefully chosen and briefed about the children's background. The cook, Mrs. Martinez, took special delight in teaching them about different foods, encouraging them to explore new tastes and textures. The housekeeper, Ms. Thompson, showed infinite patience in helping them learn about living in a proper home. "Would you like to help me plant some herbs in the garden?" Ms. Thompson asked Sarah one morning. "You mentioned knowing about medicinal plants. We could create a special section just for those." Lucas watched as his sister enthusiastically began planning her herb garden, amazed at how their survival skills were being transformed into positive knowledge. Victoria had a way of taking what they had learned in the landfill and showing them how those experiences could be valuable in their new life. The most significant change came in how they viewed themselves. No longer were they just survivors scraping by day to day. They were children with a future, with opportunities, with the chance to dream about what they wanted to become. "I think I might want to be a doctor," Sarah confided one evening as they sat in the garden. "After seeing how medicine helped me, and learning more about it, I want to help other people too." Lucas felt a surge of pride and hope. For the first time, they could think beyond just making it through another day. Victoria had given them more than a home. She had given them the freedom to imagine a different future. But even as they settled into their new life, Lucas couldn't completely shake the feeling that it was all too good to be true. Years of hardship had taught him that good things often came with a price, and he found himself waiting for the other shoe to drop. What he didn't realize was that their greatest challenge wasn't going to come from their new life. It was going to emerge from the past they thought they'd left behind. The morning started like any other in their new life. Lucas was helping Sarah with her reading practice, while Victoria fed Charles. The peaceful domestic scene a far cry from their landfill days. Then the doorbell rang, and Ms. Thompson's usually calm voice carried an edge of concern as she called for Victoria. Two social workers stood in the foyer, their expressions serious. "Ms. Chen," one of them said, "we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about the adoption process." Victoria's posture changed subtly. She stood straighter, her business acumen coming to the fore. "Of course, please come into my office. Lucas, would you mind taking Charles for a moment?" Lucas cradled the baby, trying to appear calm for Sarah's sake, but his heart was racing. They retreated to the library, their sanctuary in the big house, but left the door slightly ajar to hear what was happening. "There's been a challenge to the adoption," they heard one of the social workers say. "Her distant relative of the children has come forward, questioning the legitimacy of the process." Lucas felt his blood run cold. They had no relatives, at least none that had cared enough to look for them when they ended up in the landfill. Who would suddenly claim connection to them now? Victoria's voice remained steady. "I was under the impression that extensive searches had been conducted for any family members when the children first entered the system." "That's correct," the other social worker confirmed. "However, this individual claims to have only recently learned of their whereabouts. They're requesting a formal review of the adoption proceedings." Sarah pressed closer to Lucas, her eyes wide with fear. He held both her and Charles tighter, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. The baby seemed to sense the tension, squirming uncomfortably in Lucas's arms. "I want to be very clear." Victoria's voice took on a steel edge they'd never heard before. "These children have been through enough. I won't allow them to be traumatized by someone seeking to exploit their situation." The conversation continued in lower tones, but Lucas had heard enough. His mind raced with possibilities. Would they be taken away? Would they have to leave this new life they were building? He looked at Sarah, seeing the same questions in her eyes. Later that evening, after the social workers had left, Victoria called a family meeting. They gathered in the living room, Charles sleeping peacefully in his bassinet while Victoria explained the situation. "I want you both to understand something," she said, looking at Lucas and Sarah with unwavering determination. "You are my children now, in my heart, if not yet legally. I will fight for you with everything I have. But what if they make us leave?" Sarah's voice trembled. "What if this relative takes us away?" Victoria moved to sit between them on the sofa, putting an arm around each child. "That won't happen. My lawyers are already working on this. The person claiming to be your relative will have to prove their connection and demonstrate why changing your current situation would be in your best interest. Given everything that's happened, that would be nearly impossible." Lucas remained quiet, processing the information. "Who is this person?" he finally asked. "Why would they want us now?" Victoria's expression darkened slightly. "We're looking into that. There are some irregularities in their claim that suggest this might be related to the publicity surrounding Charles's case." Understanding dawned on Lucas. Their story had made the news. The brave children who saved the baby, the successful businesswoman who wanted to adopt them. Someone was trying to take advantage of the situation. "But we don't want to go with anyone else," Sarah said firmly. "We want to stay here with you and Charles. This is our home now." Victoria hugged them closer. "And it will stay that way. I promise you both. We're a family now, and nothing is going to change that." Lucas felt something shift inside him. For years he had been the protector, the one who had to be strong and make all the decisions. But now, watching Victoria's fierce determination to keep their family together, he realized they weren't alone anymore. They had someone in their corner, someone who would fight for them as hard as he had always fought for Sarah. The baby stirred in his bassinet, and Sarah went to check on him. Lucas watched as she gently adjusted Charles's blanket, smiling as the baby grabbed her finger in his sleep. This was their family now, not some stranger claiming a connection they'd never bothered to acknowledge before. "What do we need to do?" Lucas asked Victoria, his voice steady and determined. "How can we help fight this?" Victoria smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "Just keep being yourselves. Your strength, your bond with each other and with Charles, the progress you're making. Here, these are all powerful arguments for keeping our family together. The truth is on our side." Outside, the sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across their garden. But inside, in the warmth of their home, Lucas felt a new kind of strength growing. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living, thriving, and building something worth fighting for. The investigation into the mysterious relative revealed troubling information. Victoria's legal team discovered that the claim had been filed by someone claiming to be their mother's cousin, but the documentation seemed hastily fabricated. The timing was too convenient, coming just as the media interest in their story had peaked. "The paperwork doesn't add up," Victoria explained during breakfast, keeping her voice calm despite the obvious concern in her eyes. "They've made several basic mistakes in the family history they provided." Lucas pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate, his appetite diminished by worry. "If they're lying about being related to us, why would they do this?" Victoria's expression softened. "Sometimes people try to take advantage of situations like ours. The media coverage of Charles's rescue has drawn attention to our family, and unfortunately, that can attract people with wrong intentions." Sarah, who had been quietly listening while feeding Charles small spoonfuls of baby food, spoke up. "But we remember our family. We would know if we had relatives, wouldn't we?" Lucas nodded emphatically. Their parents had often spoken about being on their own, having no extended family to rely on. It was one of the reasons they had ended up in the landfill after losing their parents. There had been no one else to turn to. Victoria's lawyers had arranged for a hearing to challenge the validity of the claim. As they prepared for it, life in their home took on a new intensity. Victoria worked tirelessly with her legal team while still making sure to spend quality time with all three children. She seemed determined to prove that they were already a strong, stable family. The children's tutor, Mr. Bennett, commented on their remarkable progress despite the stress of the situation. "Their ability to focus and learn under pressure is extraordinary," he reported to Victoria. "They're both well ahead of where we expected them to be at this point." Lucas found himself throwing his energy into his studies, particularly enjoying mathematics and science. The logical patterns helped calm his mind when worries about their future threatened to overwhelm him. Sarah, meanwhile, had developed a passionate interest in biology, inspired by her experience with illness and healing. One evening, as Victoria helped Sarah with her science homework while Lucas played with Charles on the floor, their peaceful moment was interrupted by an urgent call from Victoria's lawyer. "They've requested an immediate interview with the children," Victoria announced after hanging up, her face tight with concern. "They want to assess your relationship with this supposed relative." Lucas felt his chest tighten with anxiety, but years of protecting Sarah had taught him to stay calm in crisis. "What do we need to do?" Victoria sat down with them, Charles crawling into her lap. "Just tell the truth. You two know your own history better than anyone. Don't let them confuse you or make you doubt your memories." The interview was scheduled for the next day. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He found himself wandering to Sarah's room, then to Charles's nursery, checking on them just as he used to do in the landfill. To his surprise, he found Victoria already in the nursery, watching Charles sleep. "I couldn't rest either," she admitted softly. "I keep thinking about how close I came to losing Charles, and now the thought of losing you too." Her voice cracked slightly. Lucas moved to stand beside her at the crib. "We don't want to lose you either," he whispered. "You're our real family now." Victoria wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "When I first offered to adopt you both, it was partly gratitude for saving Charles, partly compassion for your situation. But now," she paused, gathering her thoughts, "now I can't imagine our family any other way. You and Sarah aren't just Charles's saviors. You're his siblings, my children." The next morning, they prepared for the interview together. Victoria had arranged for it to take place in their home, wanting the children to feel as comfortable as possible. Sarah wore her favorite dress, the one she'd chosen herself during their first shopping trip with Victoria. Lucas put on the neat button-down shirt that made him feel more confident. As they waited for the social workers and investigators to arrive, Victoria gathered them in the living room for a family moment. Charles was particularly cheerful that morning, babbling and reaching for his siblings with bright eyes. "Remember," Victoria said, holding their hands, "we're strongest when we stand together. Whatever questions they ask, whatever they try to suggest, know that this is your home and we are your family." The doorbell rang and Ms. Thompson went to answer it. Lucas took a deep breath, squeezing Sarah's hand. They had survived years in the landfill, saved a newborn baby, and found their way to a new life. They could face this challenge too. The interview room had been set up in Victoria's home office, transformed to feel less intimidating for the children. 2 social workers, a family court investigator, and a child psychologist sat across from Lucas and Sarah, while Victoria waited anxiously in the living room with Charles. "Can you tell us about your family?" the psychologist asked gently, opening a folder filled with notes. "Your parents, any relatives you remember?" Lucas sat straight in his chair, his voice clear and steady. "It was just us and our parents. They always said we didn't have other family. When we lost them, there was no one else." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We tried to find help at first, but there was no one to go to. That's why we had to live in the landfill." The investigator leaned forward. "We have someone claiming to be your mother's cousin. They say they've been searching for you since your parents' passing. Does this sound familiar?" "No," Lucas said firmly. "Our mother told us stories about growing up, and she never mentioned any cousins. She said her parents were both only children, and our father's family had all moved to another country before we were born." The social workers exchanged glances. One of them pulled out a document. "The person claiming to be your relative has provided some information about your family history. Could you look at this and tell us if anything seems familiar?" Lucas and Sarah studied the paper together. Sarah's face scrunched up in confusion. "That's not right," she said, pointing to a detail. "Our mother's birthday was in spring, not winter. She always celebrated it when the cherry trees were blooming. And our father didn't grow up in that city," Lucas added. "He was from the countryside. He used to tell us stories about working on farms when he was young." The investigator made careful notes while the psychologist observed their reactions. "How do you feel about your current living situation?" she asked. "About Ms. Chen and the baby?" Sarah's face lit up. "Victoria is wonderful. She helps me with my studies, and she got me books about medicine because I want to be a doctor someday. And Charles is the best little brother. We help. Take care of him together." Lucas felt a surge of pride hearing his sister speak so confidently. "This is our home now," he added. "Victoria doesn't just give us things. She listens to us, teaches us, makes us feel safe. We're a real family." The May interview continued for over an hour, but the children never wavered in their accounts. Their memories of their parents were clear and consistent, and their description of life before and after the landfill matched perfectly with existing records. Finally, the investigators called Victoria back into the room. The lead social worker's expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something closer to satisfaction. "Ms. Chen, we've completed our initial assessment," she announced. Based on the children's testimony and our review of the documentation, we have serious concerns about the validity of this relative's claim. Victoria released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The investigator continued. The details provided by the supposed relative contain multiple inconsistencies with verified facts about the children's family history. We'll be recommending an immediate dismissal of their petition and a formal investigation into the fraudulent claim. Furthermore, the psychologist added, it's clear that Lucas and Sarah have formed a strong, healthy attachment to both you and Charles. Disrupting this family unit would not be in their best interest. As if on cue, Charles's happy squeals echoed from the living room where Ms. Thompson was watching him. Sarah couldn't help but smile at the sound, and Lucas felt the tension in his shoulders finally begin to ease. Victoria's lawyer, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. With this development, we should be able to expedite the final adoption proceedings. The attempt to interfere has actually provided additional evidence of the children's true family history and their integration into Ms. Chen's household. As the professionals gathered their materials to leave, the psychologist paused to speak privately with Victoria. What you've created here, the stability, the emotional support, the genuine love, it's exactly what these children need. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. After everyone had gone, the family gathered in their favorite spot in the living room. Charles immediately reached for Lucas and Sarah, babbling excitedly. Victoria pulled both children into a tight hug. You were both so brave today, she whispered. The way you stood up for our family, the way you remembered and told your truth, I'm so proud of you. Sarah snuggled closer. We just told them how it really is. This is our home now, and you're our mum. Victoria's eyes filled with tears at Sarah's words. Lucas felt his own eyes growing damp, but for once he didn't try to hide it. They had faced another challenge together, and their family had emerged even stronger. Weeks following the interview brought rapid changes to the family. Victoria's lawyers, energized by the dismissal of the false claim, pushed forward with the adoption proceedings at an unprecedented pace. The judge, moved by the unique circumstances of their case and the obvious bond between the family members, agreed to expedite the process. On a bright autumn morning, Lucas stood before his mirror, adjusting the tie Victoria had taught him to knot. Today was the formal adoption hearing, the final step in making their family legally complete. The suit he wore was tailored perfectly, a far cry from the oversized, salvaged clothes he'd worn in the landfill. Are you ready? Sarah asked, appearing in his doorway. She wore a pale blue dress that matched the ribbon in her hair, looking every bit the confident young girl she was becoming. Her recent medical checkup had shown she was now completely healthy, with no lasting effects from her earlier illness. The courthouse was different this time, not the intimidating place where they'd once been questioned about Charles, but a place of celebration. Victoria had arranged for a small group of their closest supporters to attend. Mr. Bennett, their tutor, who beamed with pride at his students' progress, Mrs. Martinez, who had packed special treats for after the ceremony, and Ms. Thompson, who had become like a grandmother to all three children. Charles, dressed in a tiny suit that matched Lucas's, was unusually well-behaved throughout the proceedings. He sat contentedly in Victoria's arms, occasionally reaching out to touch Lucas or Sarah's hand, as if understanding the importance of the moment. The judge smiled warmly as she reviewed their case. I've been following your story with great interest, she said. It's not often we see a family come together in such extraordinary circumstances, yet fit so naturally. Victoria stood beside Lucas and Sarah, one hand on each child's shoulder. Your Honor, these children have shown incredible strength, wisdom, and love. They saved my son's life, but more than that, they've brought a completeness to our family that I never knew was missing. The judge turned her attention to Lucas and Sarah. And how do you both feel about this adoption? About becoming part of Ms. Chen's family officially? Lucas felt a lifetime of experiences flow through him, the hardships they'd endured, the challenges they'd overcome, and the love they'd found. We already feel like a family, he said simply. This just makes it real to everyone else too. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Victoria's our mom now," she added. "And Charles is our little brother. We want to stay together forever." The judge's smile widened. "Well then, I see no reason to delay this any further." She lifted her gavel. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby approve and finalize the adoption of Lucas and Sarah by Victoria Chen. Congratulations. You are now in the eyes of the law what you have clearly already become in your hearts, a family." The sound of the gavel echoing through the courtroom marked the beginning of their new official life together. Victoria hugged both children tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Charles, picking up on the emotional moment, reached out to pat his siblings' faces with his tiny hands. As they left the courthouse, Lucas noticed a familiar figure standing by the entrance, the nurse from the hospital, the one who had chased him that desperate day. She smiled and nodded at him, a gesture of acknowledgement and forgiveness that helped close another chapter of their story. The celebration continued at home, where Mrs. Martinez had prepared a feast that combined traditional dishes with the children's favorites. The dining room was decorated with flowers and balloons, and a large banner read, "Welcome to the family, official today, forever always." During the party, Lucas found a quiet moment to step into the garden. From this vantage point, he could see the city skyline, including the distant outline of the landfill where their journey had begun. It looked different now, not a place of hardship and survival, but a reminder of how far they had come. Victoria joined him, Charles sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked gently. "I was just thinking about how everything changed that day when Sarah got sick," Lucas replied. "If that hadn't happened, if we hadn't needed medicine, then Charles might not have been found," Victoria finished, "and we might never have become a family. Sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be." Sarah appeared beside them, holding a plate of cookies. "Mrs. Martinez says dessert is ready, and she made those special cinnamon ones you like, Lucas." Looking at his sister's bright smile, at Charles sleeping contentedly, at Victoria's loving expression, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace. They had traveled a long road from survival to belonging, from desperation to love. The family they had become wasn't just a legal reality now, it was a testament to the strength of the human heart and its capacity for love. 6 months. After the adoption, the Chen family had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and extraordinary. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as they shared breakfast together, a daily ritual that never failed to remind Lucas of how much their lives had changed. Sarah was excitedly discussing her latest science project, a study of medicinal plants that combined her past knowledge from the landfill with her new academic learning. Her teachers had been so impressed that they'd encouraged her to enter it in the school's upcoming science fair. "And guess what?" she announced, barely containing her enthusiasm. "Ms. Rodriguez says I could even present my research at the citywide competition if I do well." Victoria beamed with pride while trying to convince Charles to eat his breakfast rather than wear it. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your understanding of natural medicine is quite remarkable." Lucas watched the scene with contentment, remembering how he used to worry about finding enough food for Sarah to eat. Now, their biggest breakfast challenge was Charles's determination to redecorate the kitchen with his oatmeal. The past months had brought changes for Lucas too. His mathematical abilities had flourished under Mr. Bennett's guidance, and he discovered a talent for computer programming. Victoria had noticed his interest and arranged for additional coding classes, seeing how the logical patterns of programming appealed to his problem-solving nature. "Mom," Lucas said, still savoring the newness of the word, "I was thinking about the landfill kids, the ones still living there like we used to." Victoria looked up, giving him her full attention. She had learned that when either of her older children brought up their past, it usually led to something important. "I want to help them," Lucas continued. "Maybe we could create a program or something to provide medical care, education, food." His voice trailed off, uncertain how to fully express his idea. Victoria's eyes lit up. "Actually, I've been thinking about something similar." The Chen Foundation has the resources to make a real difference. Would you like to help me design an outreach program? Sarah perked up at this. Could we set up a medical clinic with real doctors and medicine so no one has to steal antibiotics when they're sick? And a learning center, Lucas added, growing more animated, with computers and books and tutors. Victoria smiled, already reaching for her tablet to make notes. These are excellent ideas. Why don't we start putting together a proper proposal? We could. She was interrupted by Charles, who chose that moment to demonstrate his growing vocabulary. Help! Help others! He exclaimed, mimicking their excited tones even if he didn't fully understand the conversation. They all laughed, but the baby's inadvertent contribution felt appropriate. After all, this family had been forged through acts of help and compassion, from Lucas caring for Sarah, to their rescue of Charles, to Victoria opening her heart and home to them all. The rest of the morning was spent outlining their plans for the Foundation's new initiative. Victoria's business expertise merged seamlessly with the children's first-hand knowledge of what kids in the landfill really needed. They decided to call it the New Horizons program, focusing on providing not just immediate aid, but real opportunities for change. As they worked, Lucas noticed how naturally they functioned as a team. Victoria didn't dismiss their ideas because they were children. Instead, she helped them develop and refine their thoughts, adding her own insights and experience. Sarah's medical interests and his technical skills complemented Victoria's business acumen perfectly. Even Charles contributed in his own way, his happy presence a constant reminder of the chain of events that had brought them together. When he wasn't attempting to draw on Victoria's important documents or trying to help Sarah organize her research papers, he would sit contentedly in Lucas's lap, playing with the stress ball Victoria used during long business calls. Later that afternoon, as they took a break in the garden, Lucas watched Sarah teaching Charles the names of the herbs in her medicinal plant collection. Victoria sat nearby, alternating between answering work emails and documenting Charles's growing vocabulary in her phone's notes app. The scene struck Lucas as perfectly ordinary and absolutely miraculous at the same time. Here they were, two former landfill children and a rescued baby, sitting in a beautiful garden with a mother who loved them, planning ways to help others who were still living the life they'd left behind. "Mom," he said suddenly, "do you ever think about how everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to become a family?" Victoria set down her phone, giving him one of those looks that seemed to see right into his heart. "I think about it all the time. How Sarah's illness led you to the hospital, how that led you to finding Charles, how all of that led us to each other. It's like every piece had to fall into place just so." Sarah looked up from her plant lesson. "And now we get to help other pieces fall into place for other kids," she added wisely. Charles, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, toddled over to Lucas and climbed into his lap. "Family," he declared proudly, one of his favorite new words. "That's right, little brother." Lucas hugged him close. "We're a family, and families help each other, and then they help others too." 1 year after the adoption, the New Horizons program was no longer just an idea sketched out over breakfast. It had become a thriving reality. The former wasteland at the edge of the landfill had been transformed into a vibrant community center, its bright walls covered in murals painted by the local children. Lucas stood in the computer lab he had helped design, watching as kids who reminded him so much of his past self discovered the world of technology. The room was filled with the sound of clicking keyboards and excited conversations as children learned skills that could change their futures. "And this button here," he explained to a small group gathered around one of the workstations, "is how you start the coding sequence. Just like building a shelter in the landfill, programming is all about putting the right pieces in the right places." In the medical clinic next door, Sarah had become a regular volunteer, working alongside the doctors and nurses to help make other children feel comfortable. Her own experience with illness had given her a unique ability to connect with young patients, and her knowledge of traditional remedies had even impressed some of the medical staff. Sometimes, she would tell the nervous children, the scariest part is not knowing what's wrong, but that's why we're here, to help you understand and get better. Victoria had surprised everyone with her hands-on approach to the project. Despite running a major technology company, she made time to be personally involved in the center's operations. She could often be found in the family support unit, helping parents navigate the resources available to them, or in the education center, ensuring every child had access to the learning tools they needed. Charles, now a toddler full of energy and curiosity, had become the center's unofficial mascot. His weekly visits brought smiles to everyone's faces, and his presence reminded them all of how this journey had begun. He would toddle from room to room, spreading joy with his infectious laughter and innocent enthusiasm. The success of the program had caught the attention of other cities, and plans were already in motion to replicate the model elsewhere. Victoria's business acumen had helped create a sustainable framework that combined private funding with public resources, ensuring the program's long-term viability. One afternoon, as Lucas was finishing up a coding class, he noticed a familiar face in the doorway, one of the security guards from the hospital where he had stolen the medicine. But this time, the guard wasn't there to chase him away. Instead, he had become one of the center's most dedicated volunteers, using his experience to help protect and support the children who came seeking help. "You know," the guard said, helping Lucas pack up the computers, "what you did that day, it was desperate, but it was brave. And look at what it led to." He gestured around at the bustling center. "Sometimes the wrong thing done for the right reason can plant the seeds of something beautiful." Later that evening, as the family drove home together, Sarah was bubbling with excitement about a new program she was helping develop, a training course for older children to become health ambassadors in their communities. Lucas listened with pride, remembering how they used to help other landfill kids with basic first aid. "And guess what?" Sarah continued. "Dr. Martinez says I can start shadowing her next month. She thinks my experience with traditional medicines could be really valuable in helping bridge the gap between modern medical care and what people in the community are used to." Victoria smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm while navigating the evening traffic. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your ability to connect with the children has made such a difference in making them feel comfortable at the clinic." Charles, secured in his car seat between his siblings, clapped his hands. "Sarah, help. Lucas, help. Mama, help." His vocabulary was growing daily, but these remained some of his favorite words. Looking out the window, Lucas could see the landfill in the distance, now partially hidden by the new buildings of the community center. It was strange to think that just over a year ago, that place had been their whole world. Now it was becoming a launching pad for other children to find their own paths to better lives. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "remember when you first offered to adopt us, and I was scared to trust that it was real?" Victoria glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her eyes soft with understanding. "Of course I do. You had every reason to be cautious. I keep thinking about how different everything could have been if we hadn't taken that chance, if we hadn't trusted you, if we had tried to run away instead." Sarah reached over Charles to squeeze her brother's hand. "But we did trust her, and look at everything that happened because of that one decision." Victoria pulled into their driveway, but none of them moved to get out of the car just yet. This moment felt important somehow, like a punctuation mark in their ongoing story. The autumn evening was settling over their garden as the family gathered for their weekly tradition of sharing hot chocolate and stories on the patio. Charles, already in his pajamas, snuggled between Lucas and Sarah on the outdoor sofa, while Victoria brought out a tray of steaming mugs and cookies. "Tell the story again," Charles pleaded, though he'd heard it countless times before. "About how we became a family." Lucas and Sarah exchanged smiles with Victoria, each knowing their part in this well-loved tale. It had become their family's origin story, a reminder of how love and courage could change everything. "Well," Lucas began, wrapping an arm around his little brother, "it started on a very cold morning when Sarah was very sick." As they took turns telling their story, Victoria watched her children with pride. Lucas had grown into a confident, compassionate young man, using his experiences to help others while excelling in his studies. Sarah's natural healing instincts had blossomed into a genuine passion for medicine, her past hardships fueling her desire to help others. And Charles, their miracle baby, was growing up surrounded by love and security, understanding from an early age the importance of helping others and the true meaning of family. The New Horizons program had helped hundreds of children and families in its first year alone, but beyond the statistics and success stories, it had created something even more valuable: hope. Hope for those who thought they had none, proof that circumstances didn't have to define destiny. As they finished their hot chocolate, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky. Charles pointed excitedly, making a wish out loud despite his siblings' playful protests that it wouldn't come true if he said it. "I wish," he announced firmly, "that all kids could have a family like ours." Sarah hugged him close. "That's why we built the center, silly, to help make wishes like that come true." Victoria set down her mug, looking thoughtfully at her children. "You know, when I first started the adoption process, people asked me why I would want to adopt 2 older children, especially given the circumstances. They couldn't understand how a family could be built from such unusual beginnings." "What did you tell them?" Lucas asked, though he'd heard this part before too. "I told them that family isn't about where you start. It's about where you choose to go together. Every family has its own story, its own path. Ours just happened to start in an unexpected place." Charles had fallen asleep, his head resting against Sarah's shoulder. The sight of him so peaceful, so secure in his family's love, was a powerful reminder of how far they'd all come. "Mum," Sarah said softly, careful not to wake her brother, "do you think we'll ever find all the kids who need help?" Victoria reached out to hold her daughter's hand. "Maybe not all at once, but every child we help is another story changed, another life given new possibilities, just like yours was." Lucas looked up at the stars now filling the evening sky. "And each one of those kids might grow up to help others too. It's like ripples in a pond, spreading out further and further." They sat in comfortable silence, for a while listening to Charles's gentle breathing and the distant sounds of the city. Their journey had transformed not just their own lives, but had set in motion changes that would continue to impact others for years to come. Finally, Victoria stood, gathering the empty mugs. "Time for bed, I think. We have a busy day at the May Center tomorrow." As Lucas carried the sleeping Charles to his room and Sarah helped Victoria with the dishes, there was a sense of completion in the air. Not an ending exactly, but a recognition of how far they'd come, and the promise of what was yet to be. Their story had begun with a desperate act of love, a brother trying to save his sister. It had grown to include a baby rescued from abandonment and a mother who opened her heart to create a new kind of family. And now it was expanding further, touching other lives, creating new possibilities for children who, like them, just needed a chance to thrive. In the end, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living, loving, and helping others find their way from darkness into light. The family they had become was proof that love could bridge any gap, heal any wound, and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. As the house settled into nighttime quiet, the stars continued to shine over their home, over the community center, and over the landfill where their journey had begun. Somewhere out